Welcome, everyone. I'm Bill Kallestad with the Iowa Developmental Disability Council, and we're so glad you came back for another week of our Capitol Snapshot. I'm joined, of course, by Amy Campbell, our eyes and ears at the Capitol. It almost looks like she's out in front of it here today. So, Amy, we're really glad to have you here. The session, how are you holding up? How are things going at the Capitol?
Well, it's getting to be quite boring, actually, at the Capitol. After all these weeks of really a lot of action going on, now we've hit that time of session when there's literally nothing happening. They're sitting in caucus all day, getting together with their plans, with their fellow party members. And so most days they don't even start up until the afternoon. They'll be behind closed doors because the public can't go into the caucuses. And so, yeah, now it's kind of slowed down a lot, but we're now at day 92 of the session, and it's a 100-day session. And unfortunately, I don't think they're getting out by April 19th because they're kind of at a stalemate. The House has passed all of their budgets now, and normally we have budgets moving and bills going down to the governor, but the House has passed their budgets. The Senate hasn't even talked about when we'll see their budgets. And, they have to agree before they get out of the session. And what I understand is there's a holdup over the governor's educational scholarships. So the voucher program, so that kids can get public money to go to private schools. I've heard that 20-some House Republicans walked out of their caucus and said they won't support the bill. And the Senate apparently has said they won't move on a budget until that bill passes. So kind of stuck right now.
They call that maybe a political stalemate right now, right? And so hopefully there's things going on behind the scene. And I would just encourage people, those have been on hold here about for a week. We have a lot of information on our infoNET website from our last Capitol Snapshot, but also our weekly newsletter that really goes a little further in depth on those topics. So please do that. But while that sounds kind of boring and a lot not going on, I did hear there was some really exciting news. So let's talk about House File 604. I understand that. Let me tell you my summary and you can kind of clear up. I hear that supporting children that are deaf or hard of hearing and their families in regards to education. And it provides early access, some tools for them to continue in their development and language. And it really gives kids and parents an opportunity to keep addressing their milestones, whether that's developmentally, but more importantly, educationally. Tell me what you know where that is at. I know that's exciting news. So.
Yeah, that is really exciting news. That actually happened on Wednesday, April 6th, right before they went home for the week. They passed that bill. So it's on its way to the governor right now to be signed into law. And you're right, it does help make sure kids just don't fall behind in school. And that the parents know how to help them. And so, Bill, I thought instead of us talking about it, maybe we could just show the debate, because I really think it shows a lot about, how legislators use the stories they hear to pass a bill. And I also want to note, this is one of those rare bills anymore that is actually sponsored by a Republican and a Democrat. So it's a
love it. Let's go to the tape.
Okay, so I will share my screen here. Are you seeing it, Bill?
Yep, I can see it.
All right, I want to share. I'm going to the legislative website, which I'll put the link on the page here. But I wanted to show you how you can actually watch debate on any bill. So you just type in the bill number over here where it says bills. And if you don't know a bill number, we can go to our infoNET bill tracker, and it will show the bill numbers that you can look at. And over here, you have a lot of information about bill history. So there's a fiscal note that's written here, but down here where it says video archive, I want to show the video archive that just passed on Wednesday. So I'm going to pull that up. And there are options. You can listen to it or watch it, but I'll just hit it. It is a little long, but I think it's worth it.
Yeah, great.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the lead K bill we have been working on in education for a number of years. Lead K stands for Language, Equality, and Acquisition for Deaf Kids. And now, having coming over from the Senate, it's ready to go. This bill lays out an education plan for the deaf and hard of hearing children. It includes language development milestones that will be created in English and American Sign Language for deaf and hard of hearing children from birth to age 8. It also will have the Department of Education will be developing parent resources as well as teacher resources. Also, tools or assessments will be chosen to monitor and track language development. The advisory committee that was in the original bill has been struck, but the Department of Education has created a stakeholder group that has taken its place. And finally, there's a family mentoring program that's created for parents to pair them with other families of deaf or hard of hearing children or with an adult deaf mentor. That program will be contingent upon state appropriation. Those are my opening comments, Mr. Speaker.
Is there discussion? The chair recognizes the lady from Lynn, Representative Donahue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House. This has been a long time coming for some of the people in this body. I have been working on this for the 4 years that I have been here, and I know that it was going on at least a decade before that. So with that, Representative Salmon told you a little bit about this, but I'd like to go at it as an educator. I happen to know some deaf and hard of hearing students, and I know their struggles in schooling because when they were children, they did not have access to the supports, and their parents didn't have access to the supports that were necessary for them to come into school ready to learn as their peers. So with that, this bill will address the deaf and hard of hearing children and their readiness to learn when they enter school. It will help them be ready to meet grade level benchmarks. It requires the Department of Education, in coordination with the AEAs and Iowa School for the Deaf, to create that language development milestone in both English and American Sign Language for deaf and hard of hearing. The parent component will help parents who have deaf and hard of hearing children have the skills they need to support their child before they enter school, which is so very important. This is a wonderful bill. It is great for our students, and I hope everybody votes yes for the second time. Thank you.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Potawatomi, Representative Jacobson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon again, ladies and gentlemen of the House. Wonder if Representative Stade, I see he's lit up there, but maybe I could see if he would yield for some questions and comments.
Will the gentleman yield?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I definitely would. Thank you.
You're in order.
Representative Stade, you know, the needs of Iowans transcend geography. You're from Cedar Rapids, where I grew up, but we have the Iowa School for the Deaf in Council Bluffs, and the needs of Iowans transcend partisanship. We do so many non-controversial bills here.
Absolutely.
I remember you working on this in 2018 when I first was here. And I do want to salute you. You have been the mongoose who has not let go of this and has been doggedly determined, even in the minority, to make sure that this continues to have a momentum over the years. And I want to thank you for that, and thank you for so zealously representing the deaf and hard of hearing community on your side of the state.
Thank you for taking it up when it was waning. Mutually appreciated.
Well, I know that Dr. Robert Visney and Vanya Kasuf from Cedar Rapids and Shirley Hampton and Mary Brown, who was so singular in helping facilitate the communications and the iteration of this. I just wanted to say that I think this is Iowa at its best when we reach across the aisle, because deaf and hard of hearing don't have partisan politics either. They come from every philosophy and political ideology. And I think this isn't just Iowa nice, it's Iowa smart. And in any comments from you, I just wanted to say thank you for your encouragement, and wanted to thank the Senate for taking this up, because I know you were plugging the Senate as well too.
Thank you very much.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Lynn, Representative State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and ladies and gentlemen of the House. This has been a long road. I remember when I first met with members of the deaf community down in the rotunda. They would come up each year, and it was difficult to communicate. It's always been about language and communication. They would have to hire interpreters to come up here to speak with their legislators. So I don't know how many of them are hearing this today. In order to hear what we're saying in this chamber, for many require an interpreter. They're scarce and few in the state of Iowa, which is another issue. But they spoke to me, and I met Vanya, who's a constituent of mine, and I knew nothing about this particular issue. Imagine being a parent of a family with a deaf child, not being able to communicate, having no language acquisition on their part. Parents not knowing what to do, how to communicate with their own child. This bill will bring resources and mentors to help those parents and those families communicate, and for the child to learn acquisition, not only of the words and language, but of the culture, which is another missing part when you can't speak. I learned a lot from that deaf community over the years. And I also learned that there are many people in this chamber and in the Senate who care, and that who took the time to listen and to understand the issues that they face. Children of deaf children, by the time they reach school, kindergarten, are often 4 to 5 years behind their peers and never have the opportunity to catch up. This is a way to address that issue. I want to thank not only both houses, both chambers, the Senate and the House, and those members that listened and kept this alive and passed it before unanimously, but also want to thank the deaf community for their participation. Megan knows to come up here to speak with me, we would have to have an interpreter here in order to do that, to meet and talk with your legislature. So there are still barriers that need to be addressed. But they came up here year after year through two AEA directors, two directors of the Department of Education, meetings with them, meetings in Ankeny, meetings in Des Moines, meetings in Cedar Rapids, in order to put forth their issues and concerns and to address the issues in some form. This is that form now that's gone through all those processes. And I want to thank the deaf community for the persistence in getting here to see us, speak with us, and to make this change. I ask everyone in the body to support this amendment.
Seeing no further discussion, chair recognizes the lady from Blackhawk for closing comments on H 8322.
Well, I think I'm going to stop it there, Bill, because that I know that was a little long, but I think it was so worth it because there's so much to love in that debate.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. And I know a lot of our advocates are tuned in to debate and they check in, but if you haven't, it just points out again, I know we have another story coming up, but it points out how they use advocate stories. You know, him talking about having someone come to speak to him at the Capitol who has to have an interpreter there. I love the bipartisan working together, collaborating on a bill. The other part of the story there is how long it took for that bill to move forward. People were talking about 2018. Somebody said even prior to them being there during that time. You know, we talk a lot about this, you and I do, about really looking to have a champion. And what an opportunity. You know, I love that they recognize Steve's comment about how he had stayed with that and continued to work towards that. And it was, you know, he called him the mongoose who wouldn't let go. That, you know, it does take that. It takes a champion who continues to work on it, continues to build, you know, kind of a coalition of people who are interested and understand how important that is. And it is something that crosses the state and development, you know, as the Iowa DD Council, development is so important. Those early interventions are so important. And to see law kind of follow that, it's a great story all the way through. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and I think that this next story I wanted to share with you didn't pass, but it's the first year they brought it forward. And so I think that is what is important for advocates to know, is that sometimes you got to start somewhere, and it might take a little while, but eventually that persistence pays off. But I was going to ask you, you had a group up there at the Capitol from the Spina Bifida Association, didn't you?
That's correct. So kind of going back a little bit, we always offer the capital grants during the session for organizations that are interested in using a few more resources to bring people to the Capitol to speak to their legislators. They all kind of need something differently, but one of the things that we provide as the DD Council is we do some advocacy training. This group was really sharp. They already knew their story. They had a packet. But what I did was work with them to sharpen their story, to make sure their points were going to resonate. They had an opportunity to speak to the governor's office. They had an opportunity to speak to their council members. They had opportunity to speak to their legislators, and even committee members that were, maybe on the Health and Human Service budget, or the right committees that were going to be making those decisions. They did get forward an appropriation this year. I think a legislator brought forward an appropriation. Sadly, it didn't pass. But they had a really important story that day. There was a young girl that was there who was 3 years old. When she was born, it was evident that she was going to need support services going forward. And, one of our advocacy points is the waiting list. There are 17,000 Iowans on the waiting list. That's way too many that need early intervention services. She's one of them. She went on the waiting list almost the day she was born. They applied for services. She's just becoming 3. She's still on the waiting list, and they say it's 2 to 3 years. So she's getting right to the point. 2 things that were really important is, one is many of the legislators got to meet this young girl and hear her mom's story, which really resonated, and it resonated so much that one of the legislators brought that forward and talked about it during debate, just like we saw. The other part is that she brought forward an appropriation to provide funding for that organization to the tune of $150,000. They are an organization that completely raises their own money, and they were looking for a match. And so they, hopefully that last one, hopefully maybe it doesn't take that many years, but it does take years. So that's a reminder that sometimes the introduction is the first piece, and then having someone who's going to keep continuing to champion that on.
Yeah, Bill. So again, this week, we also saw the House Health and Human Services budget debated, and that's where Representative Marty Anderson put an amendment out to add those funding. And so she did mention these stories. So I wanted to share a clip there. It's not as long as the other one. It really shows how legislators take those stories and then they repeat them when they're debating. So I'm going to go ahead and bring this one up.
H8328 by Anderson of Polk.
Chair recognizes Lady from Polk, Representative Anderson, for opening remarks, Amendment H8328.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, this amendment would appropriate $150,000 for the operations of the Spina Bifida Association of Iowa. The association currently raises funds mainly from people who have spina bifida and their families and friends. And the organization has never received state or federal assistance. With this amendment, the state would match what the organization was able to raise last year from their own donors. About 2,000 people in Iowa are currently living with spina bifida, a congenital disability of the spine for which there is no cure. It is a permanent disability. 50% of those living with spina bifida are adults, many of whom were not expected to live past childhood. There is no state program to address spina bifida, and the only organization explicitly focused on serving people with spina bifida is the Spina Bifida Association of Iowa. They have a 1/2-time paid staff. This organization has built a successful program from within, but can't meet the needs of member families for guidance and support and basic case management. The funds provided are intended to fill in those gaps, the gaps of healthcare needs that are not covered by insurance. The association reports that since the privatization of Medicaid, requests for assistance, including financial aid, have more than doubled. Just before the pandemic, the organization provided $30,000 in grants and scholarships in 1 year, which was 60% of their budget. Adults with spina bifida want to work, but if their condition is severe, employers haven't been willing to accommodate, and they turn to the organization for assistance that could help. The association also provides education on living with spina bifida throughout the lifespan and care guides for medical professionals. They're actually teaching doctors who deliver babies and who are pediatricians to stop telling parents that their child isn't going to live and should be institutionalized. I have two constituents within about 8 blocks of my home who have spina bifida. They're both in their 20s and they both have full-time jobs. One uses a wheelchair and the other just has a difficult gait, but he works. In fact, he worked in the Senate as a paper deliverer and you know, a kind of a go-to person for a couple of years. They also teach teachers and school social workers to assist with programs around bullying and other behaviors of children who do not accept kids with disability in their schools. Just want to tell you a couple of recent requests received by the organization from people with spina bifida in Iowa. A 2-year-old girl from Southwest Iowa who has spina bifida and can't walk was denied a physician-prescribed wheelchair by her MCO. Why does a 2-year-old need a wheelchair, you might ask? Well, both parents work and the little girl goes to preschool. She has no independence at preschool without a chair. She has to crawl or scoot on the floor while her peers can walk and run. She also lives on a farm and her parents would like her to build her independence by navigating around the house and the farm. They appealed the denial to Medicaid and were denied again. Fearing they would lose another appeal, which means that they can't appeal again for a whole year, the association helped the family make a complaint and personal appeal directly to the governor's office, and magically the chair was approved. An adult school teacher with spina bifida in Ames used regular physical therapy, which allowed her to have some mobility outside of her wheelchair. It was especially important in her job. When her MCO denied standard physical therapy with exercise 4 years ago, her muscles became weak and her health declined. She is now wholly dependent on her chair. She also had in-home care assistants to help her get ready for work in the morning, which is a struggle for many people with disabilities. Her in-home care was also cut by the MCO, which caused her to struggle to get to work on time and ultimately almost lost her job. She had to seek legal help to keep her job, and yet she had to make significant adjustments because her home care has never been approved at the level it was before privatization.
I'm going to stop sharing there because I know that got a little bit long, but she went on to share a couple more stories. I will also put a link in our next this week at the Capitol report, so that people can take a look at that and watch the whole discussion, because I think it really does show a lot about how those stories are shared amongst legislators to try to get something passed. And I will also note that while it didn't pass in the House, they did have some conversations with senators, and the senators haven't finished their budget yet. So maybe
it's not done, right? And, we did speak to Spine Benefit Organization, and one of the things that I encourage them to do is, if hopefully somebody in the Senate picks it up. If not, there can be a lot of work done this summer, this next fall, even before they bring that back in there. A lot of work can be done. And we saw that with the changing tables. I think much of that work was done during the summer at the legislators often have coffees, or they have conversations with people and invite them out for a coffee on their own. We know that we have our own advocate from our own council who is working on early childhood detection of disabilities and the newborn screening. And she said how she took her legislator out or they met for coffee and had some conversations about what it would take to get that bill forward. And they are so powerful, those stories. And you and I get to see it quite a bit. But I also really I know that they not only read them there, but they pass those stories forward. They share those emails back and forth. And it's a great way to get people thinking about what it would take to make a difference in those people's lives. And that young girl is a great example. I know that day that we were up at the Capitol, she did have a modified wheelchair that day. When she was zipping around all over, we went into the law library. We went up to the third floor to look in over the Senate debating. She zipped around and it was just interesting to see her kind of go in and out of all the lobbyists as they were standing there talking to their senators, and everybody stopped to kind of find out what her story was. What a powerful message. And I'm glad that they didn't stop advocating, even if it took them to get there to the governor's office. But what a scary point. They had one more opportunity to say, this is not working for us. And they were going to ask for one more exception, and you only get 3 denials. And so they kind of had their last card to play. And I think they were nervous to do that, but they went ahead and did that through a powerful story. So important stuff we learned today.
I think it also shows that legislators, elected officials like the governor, but also legislators often are social workers or case managers, because they do a lot of that constituent service, that advocacy. And I know we've had a number of people have issues, and we've passed them along to us, told them to tell their legislator, and their legislator contacted DHS for them, or contacted the state agency they were having issues with for them, and got it fixed, or contacted the MCO directly. We've had a lot of those situations. So I think it just goes to show a lot of the power a legislator can have by, if not passing a bill, at least intervening on your behalf to get something accomplished. So those are just great stories. I think it's fun to share some of those, even though it took a little bit of time today.
Yeah, well, great. And they can hear a little more about each of the specific things on our newsletter that will accompany this video. We thank everybody for staying with us this time. Great opportunity to see the debates. And we've got a lot more information coming up in the next few weeks. As we wind up the session, we'll do a recap. We'll also talk about getting prepared for this summer primary, redistricting. We'll talk about some town hall grants that we have coming up, where you can start to kind of, maybe when legislators go back to their hometowns during the summer, where they can do a rally or kind of bring some people together and have conversations that are important to be had during the summer. So Amy, I think that's all I have.
Yep, that's all I have. I'm hopeful that we will be out by summer.
Yeah.